Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're going to talk about evolution of a population. Previously in class I gave you a definition of evolution, and we said that it was a change in species over time, which is really not the best definition for that. And let me give you a new one. That evolution is a change in the allele frequency over time. And we'll talk a little bit about what an allele frequency is here shortly. And that's what this video is looking at, is how can these allele frequencies change. What we do know, if there is a change in allele frequencies, that can lead to a different trait. Now recall that evolution does not work on individuals, it works on populations. So if there is a change in the allele frequency and there is a new trait, that may allow for an organism to have a better chance at surviving. And of course, as we know from natural selection, if they can survive, there's a better chance that they can reproduce, which would then increase that allele frequency. Let's start with a few definitions here. First of all, the gene pool. Essentially, a gene pool are all the genes for a particular trait in a population. We're going to be using mice in our video today. And let's start off by saying that in this mouse population, 66% of all the mice are black furred. 34% are brown furred. And let's say that black is dominant to brown. Now at first glance we might think, well, that makes sense. Black is a dominant trait. There'd be more individuals. But what we really want to look at is the allele frequency. This is slightly different than the gene pool. It is the percent of alleles for a trait in a population. So let's go back to this fur color trait. Of all of the black mice, we know that they are either going to be heterozygous, big B, and I'm going to use a black circle to represent the dominant allele, or they could be heterozygous, big B, little b. The brown mice, we know what their genotype is. They're little b, little b. But what's the most common allele in this population? At first glance you might say there's a lot more recessive brown alleles than there are dominant black alleles. But yet this is exactly what the percentages would be in order to get that 66-34%. We're going to be making these calculations in another video. But how can the allele frequency then change? There are 5 different ways the allele frequency might change. One is through mutation. A mutation is simply a change in the DNA sequence that can then change a phenotype. So let's say we have this brown and this black mouse, and they mate. And we would expect to maybe either get a brown or a black mouse. But what if a mutation occurred in the gene that controls fur color, and they end up with a white offspring? Because of that mutation, there's a new phenotype. Now we talked about a white alligator before, and we said that that was a bad variation to have in its environment. But sometimes it might be a good variation. For instance, here is a picture of White Sands National Park. This is out in New Mexico, and you can probably guess why they call it White Sands National Park. But if you look real closely, you can see an animal here. Do you see it in the grass? It's right there. Yeah, see, it's kind of a white color. In fact, many of the animals in White Sands National Park is a white color. Helps them to blend in with their surroundings, gives them a greater chance at surviving. So if these mice were living in this environment, pretty soon the percentage of the white allele might start increasing because it has a survival advantage. Another way that allele frequencies can change is through gene flow. Now this is just a scientific term. It really means migration. This is when individuals from one population move into another population. So let's get our mice back out here again. Let's say we have a population of black mice and a population of brown mice. But one day a brown mice decided to move, and now it's in the black mouse population. That just changed the allele frequency. Before there was no brown alleles, now there's some brown alleles. And maybe some of these black mice, they move into the brown mouse population. Again, that just changed the allele frequency. Depending on what those environments are, some of these may have better survival advantages than others. The third type is genetic drift. Again, this is just a nice scientific term. It means random change. Now there's 2 types of genetic drift that we're going to talk about. One is a bottleneck effect. And in a bottleneck effect, only a small group of individuals would survive some type of a disaster, and then only a few genes might remain in the population. So here we see about even numbers of brown and black and white mice. But again, there's some type of a disaster. It could be a fire, it could be a hurricane, it could be disease, and no one has a survival advantage in one of these types of situations. It's just by chance some individuals survive. So let's have a disaster. Most of the individuals died out, but these few remain. Now notice the brown allele, it's totally gone from the population. So that when these mice get together and they start to repopulate that area, certain alleles are totally gone. And it was just totally by chance as to which ones survived and which ones did not. Natural selection was not working in this case. Another example is what's called the founder effect. Now this happens a lot to animals where they somehow get separated from the rest of the population. And so a few individuals then colonize a new isolated area, and there might be very little genetic variation. So let's go back to our original population where we have equal numbers of brown and black and white mice. What if they get separated from their environment? And we see this a lot with insects. Insects can get blown thousands of miles and end up on some island somewhere. And if there's only a few of them there, that they're going to colonize that new island. Or animals can get caught on chunks of land that go floating down the river and out into the ocean. Now we don't see that here, but in some of these larger rivers, there are large chunks of land, some large enough to have trees on them, that go floating out into the ocean. And they could have various plants and animals on them. They end up on an island, and these individuals colonize that area. Let's take a couple small groups of this. And somehow they get isolated. This is the founding population. And then over time, their descendants populate that area. So you can see in one area, we have only brown and white mice. In another area, there might only be brown and black mice. So the allele frequencies have changed in those two areas. It's different from the original sample population. What individuals get separated? It has nothing to do with what traits do they have that will allow them to survive. It's totally by chance how they get separated. The fourth way that a gene pool can change is through natural selection. If certain traits have a higher reproduction, that can lead to an increase in the gene frequency. If some individuals, they're not reproducing very much, they're going to have a decrease in their gene frequency. So for instance, let's say in this environment, those white mice, they don't have as much of a survival advantage as the black and the brown mice. So some of them get picked off, some of them get eaten. And notice what happens. The white allele frequency starts to go down, the black allele frequency begins to go up, whereas maybe the brown allele frequency stays about the same. And the last type is called sexual selection. Now this is non-random mating. Here, mates are selected according to phenotypes. So in other words, females are looking for certain traits in their males. If they don't have it, they're not going to mate with them. So for instance, let's say that these two females in the middle are really attracted to these males that have large eyes. And pretty soon many of the females are mating with the large-eyed males. Over time, we could have a population that is mostly made up of larger eyes, and the smaller eyes, allele frequency decreases. The same thing happens with like peacocks. You know, the females are looking for males with the real bright feathers. On the Galapagos Islands, the blue-footed boobies, the females are looking for the males with the brightest blue legs. The reason why their legs turn blue is because of the amount of fish that they eat. The more fish they eat, the bluer their legs. Females see those blue legs and they know that, hey, this is a good hunter. This is who I want to mate with. So it's a non-random mating. Usually the females are looking for certain traits in the males. So those are some of the ways in which an allele frequency can change. In another video, we're going to be talking about how do we calculate those allele frequencies. And I can't wait to tell you all about it.